Librarian tears up poor child's late fees. Billionaire author pays every fee in the state. The sound was not loud, but in the cathedral-like silence of the Oak Ridge Public Library, it was a gunshot. Rip, the crisp, clean tear of paper sliced through the hushed reverence of the room. Every head lifted, every pair of eyes swiveled towards the circulation desk, a formidable fortress of polished mahogany that had stood for nearly a century. Behind it, Ms. Eleanor Albright, head librarian, for 37 years, held the two halves of a pale yellow late fee notice. Her knuckles were white, her lips a bloodless line. Across the counter, a little boy named Leo stood frozen, his small hand clutching his mother's worn coat. He couldn't have been more than 7. His eyes, big and brown and full of a child's deep, uncomplicated love for stories, were fixed on the 2 pieces of paper. They were his death sentence. He had kept the books for too long. The gallant prints of Etheria and comets, codes and constellations. He had read them both 4 times. We do not do charity, Miss Albright said, her voice low and resonant. Each word a perfectly polished stone dropped into the still pool of the library's quiet. She didn't look at the boy. Her gaze, sharp and severe behind silver-rimmed glasses, was locked on his mother. Maria flinched as if she'd been slapped. She was a ghost of a woman, made of tired smiles and mended seams. Her hands, chapped from cleaning solvents and dishwater, trembled as she reached instinctively for Leo, pulling him closer into the folds of her thin jacket. "Please," Maria whispered, her voice cracking. "I get paid on Friday. It's been a rough couple of weeks." The car, Ms. Albright repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She dropped the torn notice into the wastebasket, beside her with a soft, final thud. "There is always a reason. The car, the rent, the flu. I have heard them all." She leaned forward, the scent of lavender and old paper wafting from her starched blouse. "Responsibility, madam, is not a la carte. It is a full-course meal. You check out a book, you accept the terms. The terms are printed on the receipt. The terms are posted on the wall. The terms are the bedrock of a civil society." The library was a world unto itself. It was Leo's favorite place on earth. It smelled of history and dust motes dancing in sunbeams, of binding glue and lemon polish. The light, filtered through the towering arched windows, was always golden and soft, as if it, too, had been aged. Like the books, the shelves stretched up into the vaulted ceiling, a dense forest of paper and ink, promising infinite escapes. To Leo, each book was a door. He could be a knight, an astronaut, a detective. He could visit worlds where mothers didn't have to cry about the car, and where dinner was never just soup. But today, the forest felt menacing. The shelves seemed to lean in, listening. The other patrons, a college student hunched over a laptop, an elderly man asleep behind a newspaper, a young mother with a toddler in the picture book section, were all watching. They were silent statues in a wax museum of public shame. They didn't stare directly, of course. They looked out of the corners of their eyes, their faces carefully blank. But their attention was a physical weight on Maria's shoulders. Ms. Albright's desk was her kingdom. It was elevated on a small platform, giving her a literal and figurative high ground over all who approached. On it, everything had its place. A perfectly aligned blotter, a cup of sharpened pencils, a brass lamp that cast a stern, focused light, and the computer monitor that held the damning evidence of Leo's transgression. $17.45. To Miss Albright, it was a matter of principle. To Maria, it was the gas she needed to get to her second job. It was Leo's school lunch money for the rest of the week. "He loves the books so much." Maria tried again, her voice pleading. "He reads them over and over. He treats them like treasure. Then he should treasure the rules that allow him to borrow them." Miss Albright countered, her voice unwavering. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on her keyboard. "The account is frozen. No more books may be checked out until the outstanding balance is paid in full. I suggest you remember that on Friday." The finality of her tone was absolute. There was no appeal, no higher court. Ms. Albright was the judge, jury, and executioner of the Dewey Decimal System. She turned her attention back to her monitor, a clear dismissal. The audience was over. Maria's face crumpled. The public nature of the rebuke was a special kind of cruelty. It wasn't just a transaction. It was a pronouncement of her failure as a parent, as a functioning member of society. Her cheeks burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the library's stuffy air. She grabbed Leo's hand, her grip too tight, and practically pulled him away from the desk. away from the silent, watching eyes. Leo stumbled after her, his own heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He looked back once, over his shoulder. Miss Albright was still there, a rigid silhouette against the golden light, the queen on her throne. But someone else had caught his eye. A teenage girl, sitting at a carrel near the entrance, was holding her phone up, just slightly. The small red light of a recording was blinking, a tiny, digital eye capturing the entire, wretched scene. He didn't understand what it meant, but the sight of it sent a strange shiver through him. He and his mother fled the grand silence of the library and stepped out into the gray, unforgiving noise of the city street. The magic was gone. The doors were closed. The walk home was a blur of cracked pavement and noisy traffic. Their apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up that always smelled of stale cooking oil and damp concrete. It was small, a collection of rooms that were more like compartments, each one overflowing with the stuff of a life lived on the margins. But it was clean, and Maria had tried to make it cheerful with colorful drawings Leo had made taped to the walls. As soon as the door clicked shut behind them, the fragile composure Maria had maintained in the library shattered. She sank onto their lumpy sofa, the springs groaning in protest, and buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. Leo had never seen his mother cry like this. He had seen her tired, seen her worried, seen her frustrated, but he had never seen her broken. The sight of it hollowed him out. This was his fault. His love of stories, his desire to stay in Etheria with the gallant prince for one more day, had done this. He had made his mother hurt. He went to her, his small arms wrapping around her neck. "It's okay, Mama," he whispered, his own voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm sorry. I won't ask for books anymore." The words, meant to comfort, only made her cry harder. "No, baby, no," she choked out, pulling him onto her lap and holding him so tight he could barely breathe. "It's not your fault. Never think that. You should have all the books in the world. All of them." They stayed like that for a long time, two shipwrecked souls clinging to each other in the quiet of their tiny apartment. The weight of the $17.45 felt like a mountain pressing down on them, suffocating them. It was the price of a dream, and they couldn't afford it. Later, when the tears had dried and a grim exhaustion had settled in, Leo sat on the floor in his small corner of the living room that served as his bedroom. His worldly possessions were few: a box of second-hand action figures, a stack of his drawings, and a small, cherished collection of paperback books he had been given or had found. His fingers traced the cover of his absolute favorite, a worn copy of The Starlight Navigator by Julian Croft. The cover depicted a silver ship sailing on a sea of stars. Croft was a legend, a literary giant who wrote sprawling fantasies that were really about hope, courage, and finding light in the darkest of places. He was famously reclusive, never giving interviews, never appearing in public. His author photo on the back of the book was a moody, black and white shot from 20 years ago. He was a myth. Leo opened the book. Tucked inside the front cover was a faded, creased newspaper clipping his mother had saved for him. It was a profile on Julian Croft, published years ago. It mentioned that Croft had grown up in poverty, right here in Oak Ridge. It said he used to spend all his time at the public library. A tiny spark flickered in the desolate landscape of Leo's heart. An idea, wild and impossible, began to take root. Julian Croft understood. He would understand what it felt like to need a book more than you needed food. He would understand that sometimes rules could be cages. Leo looked at the newspaper clipping again, then at the book. He didn't know how, but he had to reach him. He had to tell him what had happened. He had to tell him about the queen in the castle of books who wouldn't let the children in. He didn't know that. Miles away, his story was already being told. The video was 16 seconds long. It started with the sound of tearing paper. It was shaky, filmed from a distance, but the audio was horribly clear. You could hear Ms. Albright's cold, measured words. "We do not do charity." You could hear Maria's desperate, whispered plea. You could see the back of Leo's small head, the way he seemed to shrink with every word. The teenager who filmed it, a high school junior named Sarah, had added a simple text overlay. This poor kid just wanted to read. The Oak Ridge Librarian shamed him and his mum over $17. This is not okay. She posted it to TikTok with a few hashtags. #library, #book, TOK, #poverty, #shame, #Oak Ridge. Then she went to bed. When she woke up, her phone had melted down. The video had 1 million views. By noon, it was at 5 million. By the end of the day, It was nearing 20 million. It had jumped from TikTok to Twitter, then to Facebook, then to Reddit's front page. It was everywhere. The hashtag wasn't hashtag Oakridge anymore. It was hashtag library lockout. The internet did what the internet does. It erupted. At first, it was pure, unadulterated rage directed at Ms. Albright. She was dubbed the Librarian of Cruelty, the Shusher of Dreams. Karen Dewey Decimal. Memes appeared, her face photoshopped onto the body of the Queen of Hearts, screaming off with their heads. Another showed her guarding the library doors like a dragon on a pile of gold, with the caption, "None shall pass without paying late fees." Then came the stories. Thousands of them, pouring into the comments and replies. People from all over the country, all over the world, shared their own experiences of fee. A woman from Ohio. My mom was a single mother of 3. We were banned from our library for a year over a lost copy of the Babysitter's Club. I never went back. A man from London. I was homeless as a teen. The library was my only safe, warm place. I accrued a £10 fee I couldn't pay and was too ashamed to go in anymore. I spent that winter on the streets. A teacher from Texas. I see this every day. My students want to read, but their families can't risk the late fees, so they just don't. We are punishing children for being poor, and we're doing it in the one place that should be a sanctuary. The viral wave became a tsunami. Local news crews camped outside the Oakridge Public Library. The mayor's office released a terse statement about being deeply concerned. The library board of directors called an emergency meeting. Influencers and celebrities weighed in. A mega-popular booktoker posted a tearful video response, calling for a boycott until the policy was changed. A famous actor tweeted, "Libraries are for everyone. Period. Hashtag library lockout." The system was not just trembling. It was cracking at its foundations. The story was no longer about a little boy and $17. It was about systemic failure, about the forgotten contract between a community and its institutions. It was about the slow, quiet cruelty of bureaucracy, and in their tiny apartment, Maria and Leo watched it all unfold on Maria's cracked smartphone screen, completely bewildered. A reporter from the local news had found their apartment building. Maria, terrified, hadn't answered the door. A GoFundMe, started by Sarah the teenager, with an initial goal of $20, had surpassed $50,000 and was still climbing. Strangers were arguing about them, championing them, turning them into symbols. Maria held Leo close, a fierce, protective terror in her heart. She hadn't wanted charity. She had just wanted to borrow a book. Now, the whole world was staring, and she was afraid of what they saw. The first domino to fall was Ms. Albright. The emergency board meeting was a bloodbath. Faced with a PR apocalypse, the board did the only thing it could. It voted unanimously to suspend Ms. Eleanor Albright, pending a full investigation. The press release was cold and clinical. It spoke of a commitment to inclusivity and a thorough review of our fine policies. It was a public execution, and Ms. Albright was led to the guillotine. She didn't leave her house. The news vans were a permanent fixture on her quiet suburban street. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, from angry strangers, from the few friends she had left, offering condolences as if someone had died. In a way, someone had. The person she had been for 37 years, Ms. Albright, the head librarian, a pillar of the community, a bastion of order, had been erased, replaced by a monster, a meme. She sat in her silent, meticulously tidy living room, the curtains drawn, and felt the weight of the world's hatred pressing down on her. The power flip was swift and brutal. Karma, delivered by a million tiny clicks and shares, had hit back with the force of a hurricane. But as Ms. Albright's world crumbled, Leo's was inexplicably, terrifyingly, being rebuilt. The GoFundMe money was placed in a trust for his education. The number was staggering, life-changing. A local bookstore owner heard the story and gave Leo a gift card for $1,000. A child who loves books this much should never be without them, the owner told the local news. Publishers sent boxes of new books to their apartment. Leo was no longer the shamed little boy. He was a hero, a folk legend. He was the child who had inadvertently exposed the cracks in the system. His dignity, which had been so casually stripped from him, was being handed back, piece by piece, by a world of strangers. It was organic, chaotic, and overwhelming. Bata Maria tried to shield him from the worst of it, but it was impossible. Their faces were on the news every night. She felt a deep, unsettling anxiety. This wasn't a victory, it was a spectacle. She worried about what this sudden deluge of attention and money would do to a little boy who just wanted to read about stars and princes. Meanwhile, Leo had not forgotten his own plan. While the world raged online, he was engaged in a quieter, more personal quest. He found an address for Julian Croft's publisher in the front of the Starlight Navigator. With painstaking care, using his best crayons and a piece of construction paper, he wrote a letter. He didn't write about the money or the news cruise. He wrote about the books. Dear Mr. Croft, my name is Leo. I am 7. I love your books more than anything. I read the Starlight Navigator when I am happy, and when I am sad. It makes me feel brave. The library lady was mad at me. She tore up the paper. She said my mum was not responsible. My mum cried. Now I cannot get any more books. Not even yours. The newspaper said you lived here, and you were poor too. It said you loved the library. I think you would understand. The library should not make mums cry. Your friend, Leo. He folded the letter into a lopsided square, put it in an envelope Maria helped him address, and placed a stamp on it. That evening, he slipped it into the mailbox on the corner, a small act of faith in a world that had suddenly become very loud and very strange. He didn't know if the letter would ever reach the mythical author, but it was the only thing he felt he had any control over. It was his story, told in his own words. 3 days later, in a sprawling, minimalist mansion overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a man with haunted eyes and a stillness that seemed to absorb the light around him, sat in a leather armchair, was lined with books from floor to ceiling, but not his own. These were the books that had built him. His name was Julian Croft, and he was reading a printout of an article from the Oak Ridge Gazette online. His assistant having flagged it for him. The headline was, "Local Library at Center of Viral Firestorm." He scrolled through the article, his face impassive. He saw the grainy still from the video, the back of a small boy's head, the rigid posture of the librarian. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned closer to the screen, zooming in on the woman's face. The world knew her as the librarian of cruelty. He knew her as Miss Ellie. The memory hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He wasn't Julian Croft, the billionaire author, anymore. He was Julian, aged 9, a skinny kid with holes in his sneakers and a hunger in his soul that only books could fill. He was standing in that exact same spot, in front of that exact same mahogany desk. But the woman behind the desk was different. She was younger, her hair still brown, her face less severe, but the same fierce intelligence burned in her eyes. He had a stack of books he was trying to check out, far more than the allowed limit. His own family's late fees had piled up, a mountain of debt they could never hope to pay. He was about to be told no, to have his only escape route cut off. He remembered the shame, the hot prickle of tears behind his eyes. He had mumbled an apology and started to walk away. Julian, wait. Her voice had stopped him. He turned back. She was looking at him, really looking at him, with an intensity that made him feel seen for the first time in his life. She had glanced around the empty library, then leaned over the counter. In a swift, secret motion, her fingers flew across the keyboard. He heard a soft beep. There, she had said, her voice a conspirator's whisper. A clerical error, all taken care of. Now, about these books. A boy with a mind like yours needs fuel. She had stamped every single one and pushed the stack towards him. Just bring them back when you're done. Don't make me regret this. He never did. That single act of illicit grace had changed the entire trajectory of his life. Miss Ellie Eleanor Albright had not just waived his fees. She had given him the keys to the universe. She had seen the fire in him and, instead of extinguishing it with rules, had secretly fanned the flames. He looked back at the screen, at the angry headlines, and the vitriolic comments. They were calling for her head. They had turned her into a one-dimensional villain, a caricature of bureaucratic cruelty. They didn't know that this monster they had created had once been his savior. What had happened to her? What had twisted her, over 37 years, from a secret angel of mercy into a rigid enforcer of petty rules? Had the system slowly ground her down? Had she seen too many books destroyed, too much disrespect, until her heart had calcified? He thought of the little boy, Leo. He saw himself in that child, saw the same hunger, and he saw the profound, tragic irony of it all. The woman who had saved him was now the one barring the door for a child who was his mirror image. His phone buzzed. It was his assistant. "Sir, a letter for you arrived by courier from the publisher's New York office. They said it was unusual. It's from a child." "Read it to me," Julian said. his voice quiet. His assistant read Leo's letter. The simple, heartfelt words cut through all the noise of the internet, all the rage and recrimination. The library should not make moms cry. Julian Croft closed his eyes. The moral architecture of the situation had just been completely rebuilt. This wasn't about punishing a villain anymore. It was about something far more complex. It was about redemption. He knew what he had to do. It would be shocking. It would be provocative. And it would force everyone, including Eleanor Albright, to confront the true meaning of a library. He picked up his phone. "Get me the chair of the Oak Ridge Library Board of Directors," he said, "and find me a way to talk to the boy's family, anonymously, at first. I have a proposal." The phone call sent a shockwave through the already reeling Oak Ridge library system. Julian Croft's lawyer, a sharp woman named Evelyn Reed, did the talking. The proposal was audacious, almost unbelievable. Mr. Croft, she explained, had been moved by the story of Leo and his mother. He was prepared to make a donation. First, he would pay Leo's $17.45. Second, he would establish a multi-million-dollar educational trust for Leo, ensuring his future was secure. Third, and this was the part that made the board chair, a flustered man named Henderson, almost drop his phone. Mr. Croft would like to pay off every single outstanding late fee for every single patron in the entire state library system. Every last cent. He wanted a universal amnesty, a clean slate for tens of thousands of people. The board was stunned into silence. It was an act of ludicrous, godlike generosity. The amount would run into the millions. It would solve their budget shortfall for the next decade. It was a PR miracle sent from heaven. But then came the condition. "Mr. Croft has one non-negotiable term," Evelyn Reed said, her voice cool and precise. "He insists that the transaction, the final keystroke that zeroes out all accounts, be performed by Ms. Eleanor Albright." Henderson sputtered. "Ms. Albright? That's impossible. She's suspended. She's the reason we're in this mess. The public would crucify us." "That is the condition," Evelyn repeated, unmoved. "Ms. Albright, and only Ms. Albright, must be the one to process the donation and enact the amnesty. She must be temporarily reinstated for this single task. Mr. Croft feels it is poetic. Poetic, it was insane. It was a moral dilemma of epic proportions, dropped right into their laps. To accept the money, they had to rehabilitate, even for a moment, the most hated woman in the state. They would be forced to give the villain of the story the power to grant salvation. What kind of message would that send? That cruelty gets rewarded. But to refuse, to turn down millions of dollars, to deny a fresh start to thousands of families, all out of spite. That seemed like its own kind of sin. It would be cutting off their nose to spite their face. Punishing the entire community just to make a point about one employee. The board debated for hours. The argument was fierce. "We can't do it. It's a slap in the face to that poor family, to everyone who is outraged. Are you crazy? We can't afford not to do it. This is a lifeline. We can rename the whole wing after him." "What, is Croft playing it? Is this some kind of sick joke? Maybe. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's about forgiveness, about redemption." The debate raged online as well, because the story, of course, leaked. #Croft's condition trended worldwide. The public was just as divided as the board. For many, it was a deal with the devil. Fire her first, then take the money. One popular tweet demanded. She doesn't deserve to be part of the solution. But others saw a strange, challenging wisdom in it. A prominent ethicist wrote an op-ed. "Julian Croft is forcing us to ask a difficult question. Is justice about punishment or restoration? By making Ms. Albright the agent of grace, he is forcing a reckoning. Can a person who has caused harm also be the instrument of healing? What would we do?" Maria, when she was discreetly informed of the offer, felt a nod of confusion. Her first instinct was a flash of anger. That woman, who had made her feel so small, getting to play the hero. But then she thought of the other mothers, the other families, who were trapped in the same cycle of shame and debt. She thought about her own rage cooling, being replaced by a vast, weary sadness. What would vengeance accomplish? Would it reopen the library doors for all those other children? She was asked what she thought. Her answer, when it was relayed back to the board, was simple and devastatingly humane. "If it means no other mother has to cry in front of her child in that library," she said, "then let her do it." The decision was made. The board accepted Julian Croft's offer, and its impossible condition. Eleanor Albright received the call on a Tuesday evening. It was Henderson, the board chair, his voice stiff with discomfort. He explained the situation, the donation, the statewide amnesty, the unbelievable condition attached. She listened in total silence, her hand gripping the receiver of her old landline phone. The house was dark around her. She had been sitting in that darkness for days. When he was finished, a long, heavy silence stretched between them. "Eleanor, did you hear me?" Henderson asked, his voice tinged with impatience. "I heard you," she whispered. Her voice was rusty from disuse. "So, will you do it? Will you do it?" The question echoed in the silent room. Could she walk back into that library, the place that had been her entire life, now the scene of her greatest humiliation? Could she face the ghosts of her own actions and, with the push of a button, erase them? It felt like a trap, a test designed by a god with a cruel sense of humor, to be redeemed by the very thing she had weaponized. The library's computer system. It was tempting to say no, to retreat back into her fortress of pride and righteous indignation. But then she thought of the sheer scale of it. Every fee, for every child, in the whole state. A tidal wave of forgiveness, and she thought, for the first time in a very long time, of a skinny boy with holes in his sneakers and a fire in his eyes. Julian, this had to be him. This was his move, his grand, complicated, heartbreaking gesture. He was reaching back through time, not to punish her, but to remind her of who she used to be. "Yes," Eleanor Albright said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. "I'll do it." The night they chose was a Thursday. The library had been closed for hours. The news vans were gone. The streets were empty. There was no press, no ceremony. This was not for them. Eleanor Albright walked up the stone steps alone. Henderson was waiting to unlock the heavy oak doors for her. He didn't meet her eyes. He just grunted, gesturing for her to go inside, and said he would lock up behind her. "Call me when it's done," he mumbled, before retreating to his car. The library was cavernous in the dark. The only light came from the dim, green glow of the emergency exit signs and the moonlight filtering through the high windows. The air was still and cold. It smelled of her failure. She walked past the silent shelves, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. It felt like walking through a graveyard of her own making. Each row of books seemed to accuse her. She had been their guardian, and she had failed. She had protected the books, but not the readers. She reached the circulation desk, her fortress, her throne. It looked smaller now, less imposing. It was just a desk. She sat down in her old chair. The leather was cool against her back. She switched on the brass lamp, and its familiar, focused glow pushed back the shadows. She turned on the computer. The system whirred to life, the screen bathing her face in a pale, clinical light. A special program had been installed by the state's IT department. It was a simple interface. A single screen showed the total amount of outstanding fines across all branches. The number was breathtaking: $4,782,193.12. $4 million in $17 increments. $4 million in shame and locked accounts and children who stopped reading. Below the number was a single, large, red button on the screen. It was labeled, "Void all fines." Eleanor stared at the screen. The number seemed to mock her, a monument to her 37 years of rigid, unyielding principle. Each dollar was a child she had turned away, a family she had judged. Her entire professional life, her entire sense of self, had been built on the bedrock of these rules, these consequences. And now, she was being asked to declare that it was all meaningless. Her hand hovered over the mouse. Her heart was pounding. This was harder than she had imagined. It was an undoing. It was an admission that her life's work, her entire philosophy, had been wrong, cruelly, catastrophically wrong. She thought of Julian, the boy she had saved, and she thought of Leo, the boy she had shamed. Two sides of the same coin. She had helped create one, and nearly destroyed the other. Why? When had the warmth turned? To eyes she couldn't pinpoint the moment. It had been a slow erosion, a gradual hardening. The weight of the rules, year after year, had become heavier than the people they were meant to serve. A single tear, hot and unexpected, escaped her eye. It traced a path down her wrinkled cheek, a tiny, salty river cutting through a desert of pride. It hung on the edge of her chin for a moment, then fell. It landed with a nearly imperceptible splash right on the physical enter key of her keyboard. And in that moment, something inside her broke. The rigid dam of her principles, which she had spent a lifetime building, cracked and gave way. A flood of regret, hot and cleansing, washed through her. With a trembling finger, She moved the cursor. She positioned it over the red button. She took a deep, shaky breath. And she clicked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen flickered. The enormous number began to spin backwards, like a clock rewinding time. Millions became thousands. Thousands became hundreds. Hundreds became $0. Oh, a new message appeared on the screen. Statewide amnesty complete. All accounts cleared. Eleanor Albright leaned back in her chair, the starch gone from her spine. She stared at the 0 on the screen, the most beautiful number she had ever seen. She had not been punished. She had been given the chance to tear down the prison she had built. She put her head in her hands, and for the second time that night, she wept. Not with regret this time, but with a profound, earth-shattering relief. A week later, the Oak Ridge Public Library held a welcome back event. The fines were gone, and the doors were open to everyone. The atmosphere was transformed. It was loud, chaotic, and joyful. Children ran between the shelves, their laughter echoing in the once silent halls. In the children's section, Leo was sitting at a small table, a tall stack of books next to him. He was no longer the timid, frightened boy from the circulation desk. He was home. Maria stood nearby, watching him with a soft, relieved smile. The trust fund, the opposite, was all still overwhelming. But here, in this moment, all that mattered was the look of pure bliss on her son's face. A man approached them. He was tall and dressed in simple, unassuming clothes. He had kind, quiet eyes that seemed to hold a deep sadness and a deeper wisdom. "Is this Leo?" the man asked, his voice gentle. Maria nodded, a little warily. "I'm a friend of a friend," the man said. "I heard you like stories." Leo looked up from his book. "I do. I like stories about brave people." "Me too," the man said, pulling up a small chair and sitting down at the table with him. "Can I tell you one?" he told Leo, "a story about a boy a long time ago who was poor and hungry, but not for food. He was hungry for books. And about a librarian who saw that hunger and bent to rule. Just once. Because she knew that a mind on fire was more important than a rule on a page." As he spoke, Maria watched him, a slow dawn of recognition on her face. She had seen the old author photo on the back of the book. It was him. It was Julian Croft. He wasn't a myth. He was just a man, sitting at a child's table, telling a story. Leo listened, captivated. "Did the boy become a king?" he asked. Julian Croft smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. "In a way," he said, "he got to build worlds of his own." He looked over at the circulation desk. Eleanor Albright was there. She hadn't been fired. At Julian's request, and with the board's hesitant approval, she had been offered a new position. She was now the head of the newly created Croft Access for All Fund, a permanent endowment to ensure no child would ever be denied a book for lack of money. She wasn't at the main desk anymore. She was at a small table near the entrance, helping children sign up for their new, fine-free library cards. She looked smaller and softer. The harsh lines on her face had eased. She met Julian's gaze from across the room and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement, an acceptance. Julian turned back to Leo. "The librarian in my story. She made a mistake later on. She forgot the most important rule." "What rule?" Leo asked. "That a library isn't a building full of books," Julian said, his voice soft but clear enough for Maria to hear every word. "It's a shelter, and shelters are built on mercy. A single act of kindness can rewrite thousands of stories. Mercy is a greater currency than discipline." "Where are you reading this from?" "Drop your city, your state, your country. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next justice twist."